Hi there. My name is Liz Leavitt, and I use she, her pronouns. I remember the first time I was asked to introduce myself in that way. It was a number of years ago on a trip I was helping to lead with a group of college students exploring the connections between ecological stewardship and spirituality. And on the first night when we were gathered together, we were asked by the facilitator to give our name and our preferred gender pronouns. It was a way of asking, do I like to be referred to as a woman, or as a man, or as something else? Now, maybe you have noticed this practice becoming more common, or maybe you've been reading somewhere and you've seen a name listed with she/her or him/he afterward, or somebody wearing a button that says they/them. Has anyone ever noticed that around town as you're bopping around? So that's what this is about. This is about the gender this person is and would like to be understood as. So back a few years ago, I'm invited by this facilitator to introduce myself with my pronouns, and I have to tell you, the strangest thing happened. I felt kind of uncomfortable. And I really had to stop and think about that for a minute, about the fact that I felt uncomfortable. See, I've always had a pretty fixed understanding of my own gender, and it happens to match my biological sex, which is female, but I had grown up being aware of folks who were transgender. As a child and adolescent, I had had friends and neighbors around me who had transitioned from a biologically assigned identity to one that fit better with their lived experience. And in fact, the first congregation I ever served as pastor was about 1/3 transgender folks. And I had ministered to them in their various experiences and in their transitions. So it wasn't as though I wasn't cognizant about the spectrum of gender experiences out there. But for some reason in that moment, in that group, being asked to name my own gender identity felt uncomfortable. And I had some of the thoughts that I know often occur when this request is made, but that I didn't expect to come up in my own consciousness. Like, is this really necessary? I'm obviously a woman, and the majority of us here are obviously what we are, so why do we have to say that out loud? Why don't we just only say it if it's not obvious? I did. I have those thoughts. It's not terribly woke to admit that, but that is what I thought. And I felt this conflict in myself about it. Like, I know these things, and I'm also having these troubling thoughts. And I realized that it was kind of a I am Spartacus kind of moment. When instead of just caring for people who had had the experience of gender fluidity, I really had to step out and join them by claiming that I too had a gender identity. I too had a feeling about who I was and how that fit into various categories that were presented to me by the society. And, I realized it was very similar to the experience of learning to identify myself as a haole or white person while living in Hawaii. Like when I moved to a more diverse environment, I could no longer hide in the safety of being the default identity. But I had to claim that I had a racial identity that existed alongside other racial identities, and here I was being asked to do that for my gender and to step out of that form of privilege, and it felt like a risk. So I'm thinking all this stuff, and I'm having this internal dialogue with the woke Liz and the Liz who feels uncomfortable, and they're duking it out, and I almost missed it when at the end of the introductions, one of the last people to introduce themselves said, "Hi, my name is Sam, and my pronouns are they, them." This was a person who didn't identify as a woman or as a man, but a person who is gender non-binary. Maybe that's a new term some of us have been learning recently. That's okay. We're always open to learning here in the church. This person was gender non-binary, meaning their self-identity didn't fit within the binary poles of male or female, but rather their sense of themselves was somewhere else. And I realized that by the whole group introducing itself and claiming each of our individual gender labels, we had made space for this person to tell their truth safely. And it made sense to me that we would do that. And later, when I had time to reflect back, I spent some time repenting of my skepticism. And I continue that discipline of repenting of my skepticism. I hope you are practicing that too, because I think we're living in a world in which more and more often people are being brave to tell the truth about who they are. I don't want to call this a new reality, because of course there have always been people who were non-binary, who didn't fit into the categories of identity that were available to them at the time. But it seems that right now we are living in a time and place where there's a little bit more room, not a lot more room, but a little bit more room to tell the truth about who we are. And I want to be clear, when I say not a lot more room, I mean that transgender and non-binary people are still 4 times more likely than cisgender people. There's another new word we could all learn that means someone who does fit into the binary gender categories of male and female. Cis, from the Latin prefix meaning on this side. So you're on this side or that side, you're cisgender. But transgender folks are 4 times more likely across the board to be victims of all kinds of violence. Transgender teens have a risk of suicide 4 times higher than their cisgender peers. So we're making space, but we're not making enough space yet. Clearly, we've got a lot of work to do. But those realities are out there. I'm sure you are all aware. And I don't know, standing up here, how that makes you feel. It's okay to name it. It can make you feel uncomfortable or confused or skeptical. Maybe you have someone in your own life or in your family, or maybe you have gone on this journey and you're thinking, is it really safe to be talking about this stuff in church? And that's okay. All these things are welcome. I should say our brains really don't like it when we cannot categorize things. That makes our brains really fritz out. We really want things to be easily categorized. And when we can't do that, it causes our brains a lot of stress. And so it takes some effort and some sensitivity and some work to figure this stuff out. You walk into Starbucks and there's somebody standing there at the counter who you would otherwise identify as a man, but they have a little button on them that says they, them. What do? The neighbor's college kid comes home and you haven't seen this person for a long time. You used to know them by one name and gender identity, and now they're going by a different name. Maybe they look a little bit different. What are you going to do? Take some work to think through these things and to kind of stumble our way forward. I also think it takes a lot of courage to do that work. We have to be brave to do something other than ignore it. I'm a little uneasy, I have to say, even talking about this up here today, because I know I'm going to get some of it wrong. I'm going to get some of it wrong. I'm going to use the wrong words. I'm going to risk offending someone. I'm going to risk hurting someone. That's my biggest fear. But I thought about it a lot, and I realized I risk so much more by not talking about it at all. I risk danger to others who might not feel safe to express themselves in this place that's meant to be a place of welcome and safety. But I also think that I pose a risk to myself and to my own spirituality within the Christian tradition, because let me tell you something else that might blow your mind. It's actually something that you have already said and sung and prayed about numerous times in this service, and it's this: we worship a God that is non-binary. Did you hear me at the beginning? It is not binary Sunday today. Look on the front of your bulletin. It is Trinity Sunday. And in case it's been a while since you were in math class, Trinity means more than 2. It means 3. And maybe now you're thinking, oh, Pastor Liz, that isn't the same thing at all. God's always been a Trinity. And to you I say, no, they haven't. Think about this. Before Jesus, there were very clear categories among all monotheists. Okay, I'm going to tell you what those categories are. God and not God. God and not God. There was creator and what got created, right? 2 totally separate categories. There was up there and down here. And then Jesus comes along and he says what? He says, well, I'm both, actually. I'm not one exclusively or the other. And that stops up so many people. Do you notice that in the Gospels? Jesus spends, it seems like, half his time explaining this aspect of his identity to people in the Gospels, right? Think about this. The very beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, but the Word was God. It was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him nothing was made. How can you be with and be something? Here's John 14. He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father in me? And the words that I speak to you, I do not speak on my own, but the Father dwells in me, does the work, and believe I am in the Father and the Father in me, or else believe in me. Are you listening to this stuff? Here's another one. I do not pray for these alone, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that all may be one as you, the Father, are in me and I in you, and that they also may be one in us, and that the world may believe that you sent me, and the glory which you gave me I have given them, and they may be one just as we are one, and I in them, and you in me, and they are made perfect in one, that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them as you have loved me. Now, those are mostly from John because he's really into this identity stuff, but it's in the other Gospels too, right? This thing about Jesus and the Father. And then you add all this stuff in the Spirit that we were just talking about last week on Pentecost, and it gets really dizzying, right? The Spirit who was, but also is coming and is sent, but is also a part of God. And you've got to imagine really how difficult it was for early Christians to articulate some of these things that they had come to believe about God within a tradition that didn't really have room for their experience. And maybe now that I'm framing it like this, you can appreciate some of the bravery that it took for them to hold on to some of these pieces of Jesus' identity. Like, you can imagine that it would have been easier to find some other explanation of who Jesus was, or to just ignore the sense they had had of him, that was that he was truly divine in life and ever present with them after he had gone. And you can imagine that there were some people within the body of the church at that time that said, can't we just ignore that little bit? But it was such an important part of their experience of Jesus that they hung on to it. They hung on to it. They hung on to, yes, God is strong, but also God's power is made manifest in weakness. They hung on to, the least member is the one with the most honor. They hung on to God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. And they tried, we can talk about whether they succeeded or failed, but they tried in all sorts of different ways to pass that experience on to us, right? In the scriptures, in the confessions. And I know they can seem so cerebral and confusing and overdone when you read them without any of this context. But really, they represent a brave and difficult struggle by the followers of Jesus to tell the truth about him, about what they knew God to be because of his life. And I joked about it earlier, but I do think that that deserves to be celebrated. And in fact, I wonder if it is healthy for us to remember that it should make us feel a little uneasy to say the things that we come here to say in church. We should not, without a little bit of discomfort in our soul, say Jesus is Lord of all, or the Spirit is with us, or God is not just one thing. And I wonder if maybe it would be healthy for us to reclaim some of the discomfort of these proclamations, to reintroduce ourselves to what actually is radical about the Christian witness. Maybe doing that would help us to see and to live into what's next for the church, understanding that it probably isn't what we thought, and certainly not what comes before. And it's not just one thing because our God isn't just one thing. I also wonder if it isn't a right moment to do this kind of thinking because perhaps this is exactly the kind of theology that the world needs right now, non-binary theology. Because I think despite our openness in some small pockets of the world to the expression of non-traditional identities, we really do live in a world that has less and less tolerance for nuance and ambiguity. We live in a world that is divided along stricter and stricter lines where we're all pushed to the extremes. And I think if we're ever going to reclaim the middle space, then we need a theology and a related set of spiritual disciplines that can speak to that can say it's not one or the other, it's both or neither or something we haven't thought of yet. I think we need that. I think also in each of our own personal lives, as we continue healing from this immense time of disruption and grief we've been through in the pandemic, that maybe we need that same theology. That we need to be able to say, I am so profoundly grateful to be alive, and to be in this season of reconnecting with people and things that are meaningful to me, and I am still so sad for all that we've lost. We need to say both. Maybe we need to say, I am so grateful for the gift of children in my life who bring light and love and meaning and joy, and exactly at the same time, I am burned out from the relentlessness of their care. We need to say both. Maybe we need to say, I'm so lucky to have the gift of this time that I've been given called retirement, and also I'm completely unsure what this means for my identity. Or maybe we need to say, I'm dying, but I'm still living, and I don't know what that means. It's both, or it's neither, or it's something we haven't admitted to yet. And I think if the Trinity means anything to us now, more than just a dusty concept that some theologians cooked up a long time ago, it is this, that God is with us in all of it, is with all of us in all of it. The God whose voice exploded into chaos so loudly that it kick-started creation, and the God who is a still small voice in our ear, that God is with us in all of it. The God who is as big or bigger than the universe, and the God who is closer to us than our breath, that God is with us in all of it. The God who is eternal, and the God who somehow died to teach us that it's never one thing, is with us in all of it, always. And that God is loving every part of who we are, and is loving this world, and is equipping us for its service and its improvement and grace now and always. And I offer those words to you in the name of the God who is the Creator, the God who is the Redeemer, and the God who is the Spirit who sustained us always. And just as a personal note to add this, I know there are transgender and non-binary folks and kids and teens that need to hear this message that God loves them and that God is with us. We tend to be very unkind to things that not conform to our understanding. That was true for Jesus, and I think it's true for a lot of kids today, and I hope this church can continue to consider ways to do that important ministry in our midst. But may God be with us all as God has promised to be. Amen.